Good morning. I think that's arguably one of the best praise songs that ever been put on paper, huh? A fitting song for today as well. I have a question for you. What kind of island is your ideal getaway island? You have 1 week to spend on an island of your choice. What does that island look like? Is it a remote island in the middle of the Pacific with not a person around for thousands of miles? Or maybe it's an island with 5-star resorts and restaurants with authentic cuisine, lounge chairs on the beach and Mai Tais, virgin ones. Or maybe it's more of an alpine island with snow-capped mountains, rugged coastlines, a cabin with a fireplace and a good book. I like all those, honestly. But I can guarantee that whatever your ideal getaway island is, it's not this. But why not? It's got the same sky above, surrounded by the same oceans, got the same views. How do I know that this is not your ideal getaway island? It's missing something. It's missing nature, green, natural beauty. All it has is metal and concrete and rust. Why is it that we are drawn to nature? Why do we plant flowers? Why do we take hikes in the woods? Why do we lounge on the beach next to the ocean? Why do we put plants in our home? That's kind of a weird thing. Why are we so captivated when we see a wild animal? I still get excited if I see a squirrel outside my window. What is it about nature that draws us? The great Scottish-American naturalist John Muir famously said that when he went out into the wilderness to take walks, as he would often do, he felt that it wasn't going out for him, but going in. When he left his front door, he wasn't so much leaving his home as he was entering it. And the legacy of John Muir is impressed upon anybody who hikes the mountains of Northern California. There is scarcely a hike or trail that you can hike today that he did not first hike over 100 years ago. John Muir had an itch for the outdoors. There was another man who also had an itch for the outdoors, except instead of exploring it, he chose to paint it. Instead of spending most of his life in the wilderness, he painted the wilderness, usually from his televised studio, and his name was Bob Ross. He painted an estimated 30,000 paintings in his lifetime. If you've ever seen any of his painting videos, you're probably familiar with his very calm and soothing voice as he tells you how to paint happy trees and happy clouds. Look, I even have Bob Ross socks on. You can see his fro right there. My sister gave me those for Christmas, and I gladly accepted them. So here you have two men, two very different lifestyles, but they shared a similar passion, but in two different ways. Muir enjoyed nature from the inside out as an explorer, and Ross enjoyed it from the outside in as an artist. Now, in my early 20s, I also begin to have an itch for the outdoors. I would plan these and I definitely wouldn't compare myself to John Muir or Bob Ross, but they were certainly an influence on my life. In my early 20s, I began to plan these multi-day backpacking trips with friends to the mountains, places like Yosemite and the Sierra Nevada mountain range. I found that the deep wilderness offered an experience that was sorely missing in the hustle and bustle of everyday life. It's the smell of a pine tree when you get out of your car and you're in the wilderness, the rich oxygen, and most of all, the silence. The silence is something that you can get nowhere else. All you hear is the cool breeze. Some years later, I found a way in which I could live the life of both John Muir and Bob Ross. I loved the outdoors, but I also loved art. So how could I bring these two passions together? I'm not going to take an easel and a canvas and a paintbrush out to the wilderness. It's just too big. I'm not going to lug that around. So I bought my first camera, hoping that I could capture these beautiful scenes that I had seen. I learned how to push a few buttons and did some editing in the digital darkroom, and I began to make landscape images of some of the most incredible scenes that I have seen with my eyes. I would go on these extended landscape photography trips to the most beautiful landscapes imaginable and try to get them in the most beautiful light possible. This was my faithful steed, old Betsy, and there was no road too rugged for her. I would sleep in the back. I would usually wake up about 2 hours before sunrise, and I would then scout for the best possible compositions of all these incredible landscapes that I would find in nature. Here is a sort of behind-the-scenes shot that somebody took of me while I was photographing the so-called saline stones of Death Valley National Park. These are really interesting stones. As you can see, I'm not sure how well you can see it, but there's a trail right here. For a long time, it perplexed scientists as to why there are trails behind these stones as though they're moving. Well, it was discovered actually quite recently that they do, in fact, move. These sheets of ice form on the ground, and then when combined with very strong winds, these rocks would slowly move, millimeter by millimeter, over the years and over the decades. So there I was. I sat there with my rock that I had chosen for about 6 hours until finally night came, the moon came up, and I was able to get that shot. There's a lot of waiting and a lot of patience in photography. Just outside of Death Valley, you will find hundreds of Joshua tree groves. There's kind of another behind-the-scenes shot in my camera and tripod. Hundreds of these Joshua tree groves, and I love these trees because they have these outstretched limbs that look almost like people, the perfect subject for a photographer. I didn't get the light that I wanted this evening, so I woke up really early the next morning, and just as the sun was beginning to come up, I was able to grab that shot. Now, when my wife and I moved to the Pacific Northwest, you can imagine, I was in a landscape photographer's paradise. In fact, that's one of the reasons why I really wanted to move up here. You have everything up here. You have coastlines, you have rainforests, you have deserts, you have mountains, but especially the waterfalls. The waterfalls were incredible. Here are two of them I took. The left, these are both around the Columbia River Gorge area. The left one is in Washington, the right one is Oregon. This is sort of a secret waterfall that Jen and I went to. I went here a couple of times. It's unmarked. You're not going to know where it is. You have to know where it is just off the road in order to find it. And then it's about a half mile down a very steep hike through a canyon to get to. And what's incredible about this place, not just the turquoise blue glacial water, but if you're there long enough, you may see some kayakers plummeting down the waterfall before they continue on their course. I wanted to catch one coming down the waterfall. I wasn't quite ready yet, but I did get him coming down the actual stream. On the right there, that is Starvation Creek in Oregon during peak autumn season, and you can see all the beautiful fall color. Now, as I said, it has everything up here. You have deserts, you have coastlines, you have mountains, you have waterfalls, you have rainforests. It is the perfect place to go to the outdoors. Here are some of the coastlines among Oregon and Washington. They're not the best places to sunbathe, perhaps. It's always cloudy, it's a little bit rocky, but they make for fantastic landscape images. If you're wondering if I have any Tri-Cities shots, I will tell you that subject material is pretty hard to come by in the Tri-Cities unless you like photographing tumbleweeds, and there's been a lot of them lately with all the wind. But I did manage to go about 30 minutes south and get this image of the Wallula Gap. You may have been there before. I think it's called Sisters or Three Sisters, Two Sisters, something like that. And that's the Columbia River there on the right. So not quite Tri-Cities, but hey, it's a half hour away, close enough, right? But what really captivates my wonder, I think more than any other type of landscape, are mountains. This was one that I won an award for about a year ago with an Adventist magazine. That is Mount Adams being seen over the Tatoosh Range from Mount Rainier. So I was at Mount Rainier with a really long lens shooting over the Tatoosh Range, and that's Mount Adams in the distance there. There's something about mountains. I don't know if it's the elevation, or if it's the size, or if it's the weather, which changes minute by minute when you're in the mountains, but it is amazing, and it really makes for the most impressive landscape images, in my opinion. It's not hard to see why mountains in the Bible are very often associated with the presence and the power of God. Now, as far as I know, beauty is something that is uniquely experienced by humans on this planet. Here's one of my favorite internet memes. Frank looked out over the majestic rocky coast bathed in the grandeur of the setting sun, and he thought of nothing because he is a cat. Cats are great, dogs are great. I don't think they enjoy beauty quite in the same way that we do. Beauty is a gift. It's an incredible gift. It's very hard to even explain what beauty even is. There are some arrangements of matter that we seem to like and please us, and some not so much. But it is a gift that it makes you want to say thank you when you experience it. Now, this may sound a little strange, especially coming from a landscape photographer whose sole purpose is to photograph the beauty of the natural world. But I do not think that mountains, waterfalls, lakes, forests are beautiful. I could say that with a bit more exactitude. I do not think that they are beautiful in themselves. They do not contain their own beauty. Sure, we may say, and I often say, that, oh, that's a beautiful sunset. But I think what I'm saying, and I think what everybody is saying, even if they do not realize it, is something much more subtle and much more profound. It's not that these landmarks are beautiful in themselves, it's that there's something beautiful being revealed through these arrangements of matter. There is something declaring itself through the natural world. We're getting a glimpse of something beyond, something transcendent that stirs the heart and evokes our wonder. Something that is reminding us of a fundamental truth that all of us know deep down in our heart of hearts. In the first chapter to the book of Romans, Paul says this, "For since the creation of the world, God's invisible I'm used to the King James Version, his invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that people are without excuse." So according to Paul, God's invisible qualities are clearly seen. How's that for a curious statement? The fact that they are invisible means that they cannot be seen by definition. But of course, Paul knows his readers are smart enough to know what he's actually saying here. When one gazes at the stars on a moonless night, or when one watches clouds gently moving through the sky, changing shape as they go, or when one watches bees fooling around in the yard, God's nature is somehow being revealed through these things. Paul says that this revelation is so unmistakably clear that the inference from creation to creator is so direct that those who do not glorify God are actually without excuse before him. Now, considering that almost every civilization that has ever existed has believed in God or something like God, whether it's a great spirit or a pantheon of gods, perhaps this statement is not so outrageous to make. All of these different photographs I showed you, with all of these different subjects, are really all of one subject that stands behind the image. It's not that mountains or the lakes or the flowers are beautiful, but rather it's that they are revealing the true beauty of God through them. It's God's reminder to us that something truly beautiful exists beyond what the eye can see. Beauty is God's gentle whisper to a fallen world. It's his reminder to us that he's there. Not just his reminder to us as believers, but also his reminder to non-believers as well. Not just to followers of Jesus, but to everybody. There's a whole assortment of people with all different sorts of views, and everybody has an idea or opinion about what is beautiful, what is not. But you know, I've never met a person that thinks that sunsets are the most repulsive, disgusting things they have ever seen. Never. Maybe we have different views on Michelangelo, Leonardo da Vinci, but not sunsets. I've never met a person that thinks that sunsets are ugly. What this says is that everyone admires God and finds him attractive beyond all measure. Just not everybody knows that the thing that they are actually admiring is God, the thing through the sunset. There's a principle called transposition. Transposition. The principle of transposition says that higher truths are embodied in lower truths. Higher truths are embodied and lower truths. Jesus used transposition all the time, especially in his parables, right? He said that the kingdom of God is like a mustard seed. He told us to consider the birds of the air and the lilies of the field because it can teach us something about God. He said that the signs of the times are like a budding fig tree. The ways of God can be learned through the ways of nature. The art reveals the artist. Look what it says in the book of Job. But ask the beasts, and they will teach you. The birds of the heavens, and they will tell you. Or the bushes of the earth, and they will teach you. And the fish of the sea will declare to you. Who among all these does not know that the hand of the Lord has done this? In his hand is the life of everything and the breath of all mankind. Nature teaches us about the things of God. Have you ever been caught in the middle of a thunderstorm? And I don't mean seeing it from like a couple miles away. I mean in it, where it's above you, the lightning, the thunder, it's all happening around you. When I went to northern Arizona in 2016 to photograph White Pocket, which is this area of beautiful sandstone formations that form these really otherworldly ways, I went during monsoon season. And it's Arizona, right? It's in the summer, it's in August. In fact, I went because it was monsoon season. Weird weather makes for great pictures. I want unusual weather. And I was hoping to catch some storms, but what I wasn't prepared for was a storm that would be directly over my head. It was a clear day, and I was out there doing some photography, and then I saw some clouds, maybe in the distance, about several miles away, that quickly were over my head within a few minutes. And then within the next few minutes, it began to hail large chunks of ice, and it's like 85 degrees outside. Then I heard thunder. It was loud. There must have been just a few seconds between the strike and the thunder. A few more minutes pass, and then I saw a flash, and there was literally no time that passed between the flash and the thunder. And when you hear thunder when it's directly above you, it doesn't sound like a low rumble. It's an ear-piercing explosion. And I knew I was in a danger zone. So I crouched down like this and waited for it to pass over. I was the tallest thing. There were no trees, so I was praying that God would let the thunder, let the lightning pass, and thankfully it did. And I'm especially thankful because once the storm had cleared, about 20 minutes later, it was a beautiful sunset, and I was able to get this shot. This is White Pocket in northern Arizona when the sun was setting just after a clearing storm. They are exhilarating yet terrifying at the same time, thunderstorms. What does this tell you about the presence and the power of God? Sometimes you have to be in it to really experience it. What about playing puppies? What does that tell you about God? Every mammal in this world, as far as I know, plays. Evidently, God has a playful heart in one way or another. What about ants that are tirelessly marching to and from their anthill? Does that not teach you that God never ceases to uphold the world? What about the engineering that went into ankles, or the taste of a ripe orange, or the smile of an infant, or the melodies of a songbird, or the intricacy of the eye? The art reveals the artist. Psalm 19:1, the heavens declare the glory of God, and the sky displays his handiwork. You can just imagine David, who wrote this psalm, laying on his back and gazing at the stars at night. He's so overwhelmed, he's so captivated that he pulls out his notepad to write down this little song lyric that we're all so familiar with. Sometimes you don't realize how big the universe actually is until you're looking at it in the night sky. But let me give you a sense of just how big the universe actually is, in case you forgot. Here's Earth, right? Little Earth. Not the biggest planet, not the smallest planet. It's about 25,000 miles around the circumference of Earth. Here is our solar system. I put that yellow arrow in there because you can't see the tiny little dot that is Earth right there. To me, this is almost incomprehensibly big. It took the Voyager 12 years to get from Earth to Neptune right here. 12 years. That's a long time. But that's still very small compared to what else is out there. Here is our solar system right there in our solar interstellar neighborhood. Zosma, which is right, where did I put that? Right here, which is another star, is 58 light years away. This means that if you were to go the speed of light, it would take you 58 years to get there. That's a very long distance away. But it gets bigger. Here's our solar interstellar neighborhood within the Milky Way galaxy, that tiny little dot right there. If you were to travel from one end of the Milky Way to the other end, it would take you 100,000 light years. If you were to go the speed of light, it would take you 100,000 years to traverse the Milky Way. But it's much bigger than that. Here is the Milky Way, right there, in our local galactic group. Right here is the Andromeda galaxy. If you were to travel from the Milky Way to Andromeda, it would be 900,000 light years. Take you 900,000 years if you're going the speed of light. But it gets much bigger than that. Here is our local galactic group right there in the Virgo Supercluster, that little cluster, that little dot. If you were to travel from one end of the Virgo Supercluster to the other end, it would take 110 million years, only if you're going the speed of light. That's a long ways away, incomprehensible ways away. But that's still kind of small. Here is our Virgo Supercluster within our group of local superclusters. I don't even know why they call it local at this point, but it is right there. Corona Borealis is 964 million light years away. And then finally, here's our group of local superclusters, that little dot right there, within the observable universe. I don't know if there's a point to give you a number at this point. These numbers are just meaningless at this rate. That's a huge place. It's an incomprehensible place. Up until the 20th century, it was generally believed that the universe existed eternally. It existed in a steady state. But with the advent of contemporary cosmology, it has confirmed the simple statement, an elegant statement uttered thousands of years ago, that in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. This single verse, the first verse of the Bible, arguably contains the most profound sentence with the farthest reaching implications than any other sentence that has ever been put on paper. Out of nothing, God created everything. There's a Latin phrase that theologians often use, creatio ex nihilo. Creatio ex nihilo means creation out of nothing. Now, I know that thousands of years of Judeo-Christian history has sort of familiarized us with this concept. You know, it's nothing new, it's nothing novel, it's nothing original, we know it. But this would have been so strange and so foreign at the time when it was written that it would have perplexed most readers. In the ancient Near Eastern world, the gods created the universe, and they did it out of pre-existing material. One god would create the earth out of the bones of another god, and create the sea out of her blood, and so on. But not so in Genesis. There's no pre-existing material to be found. In the beginning, it was just God. He created the heavens and the earth, or we would call the universe, out of nothing. Now, close your eyes for a moment. Try to imagine something. Now, actually, do the opposite. Try to imagine nothing. Can you? I know what you're actually thinking of, because I'm thinking of the same thing. You're thinking of this, right? Empty, black space. That's your nothing. But of course, empty black space isn't nothing, that's something. When we say that God created the universe out of nothing, we don't mean that there was this stuff called nothing that he created the universe from. We mean that he created it out of non-being. The whole idea of non-being is utterly incomprehensible to us. It's beyond the reach of our imaginations. You cannot think of nothing because non-being is not the object of thought, because it's not an object at all. Aristotle said, I think he defined nothing the best when he said, nothing is that which rocks dream about. But God's imagination is limitless. He did not need to consult other gods before creating the world. He didn't need to come up with a drawing board and read his favorite book to get some inspiration. He thought up the beauty and the complexity of the world purely out of the infinitude of his imagination. He thought up the color blue and hummingbirds and H2O. He thought up photosynthesis. He thought up toenails. He thought up sneezes and cool breezes and camel humps. He thought up mothers and music. He thought up the idea of food, something we're all happy he did. And if you think about it, food's a little strange, isn't it? We are taking material we find in the world and we're putting it into our bodies so that it will sustain our lives. And yes, he even thought up spiders for a reason that I will never understand throughout all eternity. Although I have a suspicion, this is just my theory, that spiders are directly resulted from the fall of the world into sin in Genesis chapter 3. I don't have any evidence for it, but I just like believing that. Out of nothing, God created everything. But we're still left with this last question. Why? Why did God choose to create? Was it even a choice at all? Was he compelled to create for some reason? If it was a choice, why did he make it? Was he lonely and he was in need of some companionship? It's important to keep in mind that God is in need of nothing outside himself. In the book of Acts, chapter 17, verse 25 says, God is not worshipped with men's hands as though he needed anything, since he gives to all life, breath, and all things. God is self-sufficient, self-contained, self-fulfilled. There is nothing that we can give to God that he does not first possess within himself, including companionship. God has existed eternally within the society of three divine persons, the Father, the Son, and the Spirit. So it's not because he was lonely, but nor was it because he had to create the world, as though he was compelled to do so. God has no obligations like that because he is sovereign. There's nothing above God that obligates him to do anything. So if he created the world, it could not have been because he's lonely, but it also could not have been because he had to. Creation had to be a free act of God. Now, the reason why he did this, I think, is actually embedded in the first chapter of the book of Genesis. Let's look at verse 2, since we already read verse 1. Now the earth was without shape and empty, and darkness was over the face of the watery deep. But the Spirit of God was moving over the face, or the surface, of the water. So before God fashions and forms the earth, it was a watery, lifeless void, dark and empty, as the text says. So what does he do? He fills it with light. Then he creates the oceans, and we're not going to look at all the days of creation, but we know how it goes. He creates the oceans, and he fills the empty oceans with marine life. He creates the sky, and he fills the sky with the birds of the air. He creates the land and fills the empty land with animal life. Are you beginning to see a pattern here? He creates space, and then he fills that space. He is building something layer by layer by layer, and he's assigning a function to each of the things he creates for the purpose of something that he is going to create at the end. God is building something for his final act of creation, for the climax of his creation. It's all but finished. It's ready for the thing that he created everything else for. He creates you. He creates humans. In Genesis 1:28, he then says to the first humans, Adam and Eve, God blessed them and said to them, be fruitful and multiply. Fill the earth and subdue it. Rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the air and over every creature that moves on the ground. God creates the world for humans to rule over. He makes mankind in his own image to go forth and reflect that image to the world, something we'll be hearing more about next week when Pastor Sergio preaches on it. Why did God create? For you. It's a gift. It's the greatest gift, isn't it? It's the gift of everything. It's the gift of existence. Creation is just as much an act of God's grace as redemption is. It is God who creates. It is God who redeems. and thus all glory goes back to God. Genesis chapter 2. And on the seventh day, God finished his work that he had done, and he rested on the seventh day from all his work that he had done. So God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because on it, God rested from all his work that he had done in creation. What's the one thing we can get out of this text? He was done. He was finished. As a photographer, I will sometimes edit my images for weeks or months. I want to get it just right. I'll let it linger. I'll come back to it weeks later until it's just where I want it. But the thing is, it's actually never where I want it. I never actually finish a landscape image. I'm always tweaking it more. I'm always sharpening it more. I'm always trying to get it just perfect, adjusting the tones, adjusting the saturation levels. I'm always trying to get exactly where I want, but I can't ever seem to do so. Usually, just out of frustration, I'm like, it's done. I'm done. I'm just going to... If you're an artist, you probably know exactly what I'm talking about. You just have to eventually stop. But God did not merely stop creating. It says he finished his work. Finished unlike no project is ever finished. The Sabbath is a memorial of God's complete work of creation, and it was not complete until he created you. It's his weekly reminder to the world that we have been created with a purpose. So I want to leave you with this. Nature reveals the qualities of God, as Paul says. But in this modern day world, we spend very little time in nature. I am horrified as to how little time I have spent in nature these last 2 years. I used to be in the wilderness a lot. We live in drywall boxes. We hear the unceasing sound of cars from the roads near our houses. We need the quiet beauty of the wilderness to rejuvenate us. We're made to live in it. God, after all, put Adam and Eve not in a palace, but in a garden. Sometimes we need the might and the power of the ocean to remind us, or the grandeur of the mountains to turn our minds to that which is bigger than ourselves. Most of the things we surround ourselves with in life, they're things that are useful to us, things that we like to use: books, cars, food, information. All of these things are useful to us. But you enjoy nature not for what it does for you, not because it's useful to you, but simply for what it is. The sunset, the waterfall, the redwood tree, these are not useful to you, but they're good for you. Why do you get that inexplicable feeling of nostalgia when you behold the natural beauty of the world? I think that's the best way to describe it, is nostalgia. It is a reminder of a longing for our true home that God has prepared for us. The beautiful natural scenery of the world, they're whispering our true home to us. So the challenge is this: make time to go out in nature this year. Spring is just around the corner. Schedule a trip to Mount Rainier. We're only a few hours away. Visit some of the waterfalls in the Columbia River Gorge on the way to Portland. This summer, I'm planning to take a couple backpacking trips with some of the young adults. If you're interested, let me know. We'd love to have you come. Let God speak to you through the things that are made, and I can guarantee you will not be disappointed.